Nosotros seguimos recorriendo el Caribe y vamos a conversar de inmediato con el primer ministro de San Vicente y las Grenadines, Ralph Goncalvez. Gracias por recibirnos, primer ministro. Venezuela comenzó el proceso de retiro de la Organización de Estados Americanos. ¿Qué piensa sobre esto?
The position of the Secretary General of the OAS and some other countries in the OAS, including one or two Caribbean countries, their position is entirely wrong in wanting to interfere in the internal affairs of Venezuela. It's a simple proposition in international law, and it is inside of the treaty which established the OAS. There are no conditions in Venezuela to demand any interference. You don't have mayhem and a kind of a humanitarian crisis of an extraordinary kind to justify any intervention. What you have in Venezuela is a robust struggle within a democracy. That is what happens. So if thousands of people demonstrate in the city of Kingstown 2 days a week, what does that do? It overturns the election which I won. The most important demonstration is that which takes place by the secret ballot. Protesters can protest within the framework of the law. You can't break the law. That is elementary. From the time the Bolivarian Republic was established, you have had more elections in Venezuela than in any other country in the Western Hemisphere. And all these elections have been adjudged to be free and fair and reflecting the democratic will of the people. Right now, the media in the United States and a lot of protesters want to have a rerun of the elections in America. They don't support President Trump. Well, he won the election. You may not like it, but minorities don't rule majorities. It's as simple and straightforward as that. So what happened? The OAS will call for interference in America. There have been protests, people have been injured, even killed in the United States of America. We see protests one side or against the other. We just saw that in New York City. What you will have? Interference by the OAS is just absolute nonsense. What should be happening is that where you have this sort of a sharp conflict between political forces in a democracy, other countries can say, well, shouldn't you talk? Shouldn't you have a conversation? Shouldn't you have a dialogue to see if you can improve relations until the time comes for elections? Or if there's any agreement between both sides to have an earlier election. But the Constitution has to be followed. If every other day you want to chop and change, what is going to happen? So if somebody else wins in Venezuela, those who oppose to them would come on the streets, and the same thing happens over and over again. The people of Venezuela have to resolve their internal difficulties by themselves. But the idea of trying to sanction Venezuela at the OAS, there's no basis for it. First of all, in principle, because you can't interfere in the people's in another country's internal affairs. And then beyond that, the factual situation on the ground doesn't justify at all anything other than a call that people must have dialogue, which is the normal discourse in democracies, which is what I understand President Maduro has been calling for, which is what I understand that a number of different former presidents on 3 countries calling for, what the OECS here in the Eastern Caribbean has called for. And the meeting in El Salvador of the foreign ministers of CELAC on Tuesday or Wednesday, that is what I believe that they're calling for also. Dialogue, not to interfere or to have regime change. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. It's absurd, in fact and in law.
¿Qué piensa de la actuación del secretario general Luis Almagro?
Disappointing. Because St. Vicente and Grenadines voted for the Secretary General, you know. Because he was the foreign minister for Pepe, the president of Uruguay. In fact, Venezuela said, yes, Luis is a good man. and campaigned for Luis. And of course, we see what happens now. You know, we make mistakes sometime. We make mistakes sometime. And though he's a cultured man, I'm not saying anything personal against him, but the way he has sought to mobilize the elements in the OAS against sovereignty, independence, democracy, and the people's right to pursue their own path has not only been disappointing, but contrary to international law and the Charter of the Organization of American States. You cannot interfere in the internal affairs of a sovereign country. It's as simple as that. Otherwise, you'll have chaos and disorder in the world. I'll tell you something. When there was a constitutional coup against a parliamentary and legislative coup against Dilma Rousseff in Brazil, we made our position known. But we did not support any effort at the OAS or anywhere else to interfere in Brazil's internal affairs. You only would interfere is if matters have reached such a stage that there's such chaos, so much murder and mayhem, a condition so offensive to human civilization that you will then say, let's try and intervene on humanitarian grounds and save a problem. But you can't go about wanting to direct regime change from the OAS. That's not your job. Completely wrong, completely against international law.
El primer ministro de Antigua y Barbuda, en una entrevista para Telesur, Gaston Brown, dijo que la próxima reunión de la CELAC este martes pues será un foro ideal para que todos puedan expresarse sin la presión de los Estados Unidos. ¿Cree que esto es así?
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And that is one of the reasons why CELAC was established.
El gobierno de Venezuela ha denunciado que algunos países del Caribe han sido presionados por su posición de apoyo a Venezuela. Quisiéramos saber su opinión.
No one from the United States has called me because I suspect they feel that I'm immune from pressure. But I know that different members of my government have been spoken to by different forces. But the position of the government of St. Vincent and Grenadines is absolutely clear. Non-interference in the internal affairs of Venezuela. There is, let the Constitution follow its course. And in that process, all sides should be talking, as happens in normal democracies.
¿Qué diferencia habrá entre la OEA y esta reunión que se va a llevar a cabo en El Salvador de la CELAC?
Well, I suspect that there are countries in CELAC who are going to want to carry a line of interference. But there would be many countries which would reject that.
¿Cuáles son las expectativas de este encuentro en la CELAC en El Salvador?
Well, I'll tell you what my expectation is similar to that of Prime Minister Brown of Antigua and Barbuda. To have a sensible, honest discussion geared towards a conversation, dialogue within the framework of the Constitution of Venezuela. Simple.
Muchísimas gracias, primer ministro Ralph Goncalvez, primer ministro de San Vicente y las Granadinas. Con esto los invitamos a que continúe con más de Telesur.